Welcome to Knowledgeable Aging. I'm your host, Jason Kotar. Joining us today to talk about the dangers of unprepared caregiving is Pam Reynolds. Pam is the author of the recent book, Caregiving with Confidence. She is a certified aging life care manager, certified professional gerontologist, and certified dementia practitioner. Pam has been in the field of senior healthcare for her entire career, beginning with senior facilities and nursing homes, and in 2013 started her own home care company. In 2019, she sold that company to pursue her dream of becoming an elder law attorney. She is now working as a paralegal and preparing to begin law school in the fall of 2023. How are you doing today, Pam?
Morning, Jason. I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing very good. Thank you for joining us. So I want to
Happy.
get started, Pam. We're going to talk and we're going to discuss some of the pitfalls and hurdles you may face aging without a plan in 5 key areas: advocacy, medical, environmental, social, and financial.
Mhm.
But I'd like to start with, what is a caregiver?
It's a good question. That's how I started my book, was with addressing that question in the introduction, because I have found that over the course of my career, one of the biggest mistakes that people make is not identifying as a caregiver soon enough. We don't realize that we've even fallen into that role, especially when you have, that sandwich caregiving phenomenon going on where you've got multiple different dependents, maybe young children, you've got job, you've got all these different responsibilities, and caregiving for an aging parent kind of sneaks up on you. And so that's my goal with the introduction of the book, is to have people really identify as a caregiver and really start to own that role. And so it's very prevalent. In fact, 1 in 5 Americans are caregivers, and 10,000 people a day are turning 65. So it's just continuing to grow, dramatically. And I think when people think of a caregiver, they generally think of the hands-on physical care, providing assistance with things like bathing and toileting and eating and things like that. But really, caregiving is anyone who provides support to another person, whether that be physically or financially or emotionally or socially or any other type of support. And there's a real danger there in what I call the slippery slope. You start by just basic check-ins, let me stop by on the weekends and make sure mom has enough groceries, or go through the mail and make sure nothing was missed, things like that. And then it just starts to snowball, right? And the danger is that it snowballs very quickly into a situation where it becomes a crisis and you have no real plan, no real action plan to take. And so I think it's very important that we begin to identify as a caregiver much sooner in the process than most people do.
Yeah. Is there a danger in not identifying as an advocate?
Absolutely. I think being a caregiver is synonymous, hand in hand, with being an advocate. And I don't think most people view themselves that way. They think of advocates as, nurses and lawyers and social workers. And really, being a caregiver, I think our primary function is being an advocate, because it's so easy for aging adults to slip through the cracks of the medical system and the legal system. And so we have to be their voice. We have to step in and make sure that those balls don't get dropped. So that's why I start, with advocacy, because as you identify as a caregiver, you really have to also own that role of advocacy.
Yeah. In the area of medical, you kind of mentioned the word snowball. The medical side of things, that could snowball real quickly, can it?
It really does. Like I mentioned earlier with the slippery slope, you start off with very little things. Maybe it's filling the pill box. Maybe it's making sure the medications are in order. Maybe it's just taking care of doctor's appointments. Getting mom or dad to the doctor and taking care of that. But there's a lot of things that just start to add up when it comes to the medical side of things, especially, most elderly people have a chronic illness. Many of them have more than one. And so managing all these different diagnoses and, the medications and the treatments and the doctor's orders. And it's not just that, it's exercise and physical therapy and nutrition and, all these other things, the list goes on, and you can easily get in over your head. And, most caregivers, most family caregivers, we're not medical professionals, we're not nurses, so you go into this with very little medical knowledge. You learn a lot really quick if you're paying attention, but not understanding and managing the medical needs thoroughly can really lead to those needs not being met properly. And avoidable illnesses and injuries can really have some devastating consequences on a frail elderly person.
Yeah. What do people need to know about environmental areas?
Yeah, I think this is the longest chapter in my book. This is a big one. The question of whether mom or dad can age in place safely and appropriately, or whether we should be considering an assisted living facility. And, it's always one of those hot button areas when you're talking about, what an aging loved one wants to do long term. Dangerous because of safety concerns, really. Is home the right place for your aging loved one? Everybody wants to stay at home. I think, in the, let's see, how long was I running? Almost a decade that I was running a home healthcare company. Every client I sat down with, that was one of their number one goals. I just want to stay at home. The caregiver, yeah, we want to keep mom or dad at home. We promised them that we would. And that's great. If you can come up, again, plan early, come up with a good feasible plan for aging in place and have the right support systems in place, that can be wonderful. But looking at it from a realistic standpoint and planning for the worst and making sure that you have the resources in place to make that plan realistic. Those things have to happen. Otherwise, when a wrench gets thrown in the plan, you end up in a situation where it's just not safe to go back home. So really taking a look up front at that plan, making the adjustments well in advance prior to the crisis to make that aging in place plan realistic. And you can't do all that yourself. You've got to have resources. You got to have a team. And bringing in professionals that can give you guidance. Maybe an aging in place specialist of some kind, maybe an occupational therapist. People that can really help you look at the things that you wouldn't necessarily consider yourself. And then it's really important to have a plan B. So if aging in place does not work, what are the options for senior living? What can, in the area where your loved one lives, what's feasible from a financial standpoint? And then, having that agreement with your loved one that if this doesn't work out, what are we going to do? Because so often they just refuse to even consider that this isn't going to work. So, for my sake, mom, for my sake, dad, what is the backup plan? What would you be willing to do if this doesn't work, or even temporarily, right? So if home is not working during a stage of a debilitating illness or injury, what are we going to do? And so having that conversation. And again, it's not an easy one to have. So, I offer some advice in the book of tips about conversation starters, but also bringing in those professionals and those people that have the advice can really serve as a buffer and can help you get that conversation going.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about staying with the environmental aspect of it?
Mm-hmm.
How do guilt and anxiety, how does that impact the caregiver?
Yeah, this is huge. I mean, when I talk later in the book about caregiver burnout, I think that's one of the biggest sources for it. We have this ideal scenario in our mind of how caregiving is going to play out, or what kind of caregiver we're going to be, or what decisions we're going to make for our aging loved one. And in this, I go back to the advocacy. Primarily, first and foremost, we are an advocate, and it is our duty to make the best decisions, help our parents make the best decisions, and the right decisions and the safe decisions. It's our job to, look at all the circumstances and make the best decisions within our situation. And I think so often we get hung up on that ideal. We get hung up on, this is the promise that I made. The promises are huge. I promised mom I'd never put her in a nursing home. And sometimes we have to let go of that. We have to consider that right now, that promise, unfortunately, we have to consider their health and their well-being above that promise.
Mhm.
And, it really does, it's heartbreaking, when you can't commit to that. But prioritizing, advocating, for the right choice, for the safest choice for your loved one is what really matters the most. And so I see that a lot. I've had to talk a lot of family caregivers through that process of, letting go of some of that guilt.
Absolutely. What are the risks of social isolation?
Yeah, so this is one of the big things when it comes to the aging in place question, right? So everybody thinks, um, assisted living or some kind of senior living is the best choice for socialization for their aging loved one. And in many cases, that's true, but not always. But it is isolation is a huge factor when it comes to mental health in the elderly. The more debilitated someone gets, the more frail they get, the more homebound they become, and so they stop going out and participating in the activities that they used to. They lose social connections. And so whether they're living at home or in a community, this can happen. And so it's important for us as caregivers, as advocates, to help our aging loved ones to combat this by helping keep them plugged into their social networks as much as possible. Reach out to their network for them. Whoever they had contacts with, whatever was important to them. Maybe there's a social club, maybe there's a faith community, maybe there's a senior center, whatever they used to be involved in. Keep those contacts going. Reach out on their behalf. Let them know what's going on. Tell them, my mom or my dad is not able to get out to these activities anymore. Maybe they can help. A lot of these resources are able and willing to help. They want your loved one to stay involved. So maybe they can provide transportation. Maybe they can make home visits. Maybe they can, maybe there's a virtual option. So just really prioritizing keeping those contacts going, because a lot of times our loved ones they just kind of seclude themselves and they just become withdrawn. And so if we take the action, and make that connection for them, then we can keep them socially engaged as much as possible.
How is it I mean, I don't say how is it possible, but keeping our loved one engaged, if you are a long distance caregiver, Pam, how do you help your loved one? Like, thankfully, I'm local, right? So if my mom or my dad needs me, but what do you say to somebody who's watching this who has a loved one that's nowhere near them? What do they start to think about?
Yeah. Well, two things. I mean, I think one, it's gonna be hard for elderly people, but our world has shifted to have a lot more virtual options and a lot of easier virtual options. I mean, today I've never used GoToMeeting before, but I signed right on and it was all set up. It gave me instructions, so there's just a lot more. Technology has gotten easier to use, easier to work with, and so there's a lot of ways that we can use that to keep that engagement going. But aside from that, because a lot of times I get shot down with that suggestion pretty quickly with the aging population, it's having boots on the ground, having a
Yeah.
professional, finding the resources in the area where your loved one lives. And I always emphasize this when it comes to the advocacy part, is that don't try to do it alone. Have a team. Find professionals in the different areas. The key areas that I mentioned in the book. Find professionals that can come in and provide for those different needs. A big resource, a really good resource, is an aging life care manager. These are nurses and social workers who specialize in working with the aging population. I have the credential. I don't work as one myself right now, but there's a network, Aging Life Care Association, where you can go and you can find someone local in the area. And there's a lot of other professionals that do similar type of work. But having someone that can be your eyes and ears, that can go in and put their eyes on the situation and report to you what's really going on, because our loved ones can be really good at hiding, when things are getting difficult and when they are struggling. And so having someone that can really give you the realistic picture of what's going on, and then they know the resources. So you might not know because you aren't from the area, but they do. And so you can tap into that and you can, pull together a support network through that resource.
I love the idea of the support network when it comes to caregiving, because when we think about a team, oftentimes when it comes to our health, right? So if somebody's battling cancer, they want to make sure they have the oncologist and the primary care, but
Right.
taking that to the next level when it's taking care of a loved one, right? You shouldn't have to do it all by yourself. Yeah, that's
Right.
really good. Yeah. Um, what is it that people should know about in the financial areas, Pam?
Yeah, this one is tough. I think next to the environmental, this is another big one, and they tie in very closely together, of course. The unexpected danger when it comes to the financial, there's a lot of unexpected costs. You don't, people underestimate what senior living and senior support services cost. And a lot of people expect that, Medicare and Medicaid are going to pay for everything. And it's just simply not true. It's unfortunately it's not the case. Those are good resources, but most of the services and senior living communities are private pay. And so, not planning for that. When you think about retirement, planning for retirement, most people neglect to plan for the long-term care piece of that. And I don't just mean insurance. I mean, financially, planning for what does that look like? What is it going to cost? What are the unexpected costs that can arise? And so, developing a financial plan around that early is ideal. Obviously, when you're a caregiver, you're kind of thrown into the situation where whatever planning your parent has or hasn't done is what you're faced with. And so you have to make the best of what is there. So get your arms around the financial situation early is my biggest advice. Again, identifying as that caregiver and knowing that you're in that role, and getting your arms around that as soon as possible, especially before your loved one starts to have any kind of cognitive decline, so they can point you in the right direction. I can't tell you how many times, I mean, elderly clients, they have money spread out everywhere. I mean, I don't know what that's about, but it's a little bit in this bank and this account and everywhere, and so the statements are it's just a mess. And so trying to really get your arms around that, get a really good picture of what resources are or are not available, and then you know what you're working with. So that's the best place to start. And then if you find that they are likely to outlive their resources or to need more care and services than they can afford, then you need to start looking at the Medicaid part. You need to start looking at what they would qualify for. And Medicaid isn't easy. I mean, it's not as simple as oh, you're elderly and you need care, you get Medicaid. It doesn't work like that. It's a process. It takes time, takes work, and it's very easy to make mistakes and disqualify yourself. And so there's a look back period. So depending on the state, 5, 7, so years. So you have to plan in advance for needing that resource. And this is just so important, because if you don't do that, you can end up with your loved one in a less desirable situation due to not having the resources. And money does give you options. The more money you do have more options available to you, but planning ahead gives you options too. And even if you're going to use Medicaid or other government funding, having a plan ahead of time, getting on waiting lists, making decisions in advance can still give you the best options within the resources that you have. So again, I'm going to harp on getting a professional involved, because these are not easy things to plan for. Finding a financial advisor, a good estate attorney that understands Medicaid, working with that team to help you develop that plan is your best strategy.
Should somebody consider, if they're taking care of a loved one, a financial power of attorney?
Absolutely. The power of attorney for finances, and then I'll bring up the medical as well. Those, and they vary by state. So the terms, I know you have people watching this all over, but getting those medical and financial documents in place, again, prior to the need, prior to the medical decline, prior to the cognitive decline. Those have to be done in advance. If you wait until mom or dad is showing signs of dementia, you're probably too late. The doctor's going to say they can't make that type of decision. They can't sign legal documents. So it's very important to get those done in advance. And then when the time comes, you have the legal authority to, handle these situations. I mean, again, dealing with the Medicaid process, there's a lot of steps, and there's a lot of things that you have to do, and there's a lot of different people you're going to have to interact with, and you have to provide, documentation of your authority to do that. And the only way to really do that is with a power of attorney. If you don't have that, and the time comes and mom or dad's not able to appoint you because of their cognitive function, you're going to have to go through guardianship, and that process is lengthy and painful, and it takes time. And again, that time is so crucial and valuable in that crisis situation. So yes, getting those done well in advance of the situation is good.
Yeah. You briefly mentioned caregiver burnout.
Mhm.
How real is caregiver burnout?
Very real. It's extremely prevalent, and I think it's often just confused with depression or anxiety, but it's an even more dangerous phenomenon than that. It's at an all-time high, especially post-COVID. The stress that caregivers experience can lead to a number of different ailments and even take years off of their lives. I've seen many caregivers, become severely ill, debilitated, or even pass away before their care recipient because of the stress. I don't think it's any secret of how detrimental stress can be on the body, mentally and physically. Um, so I'm going to sound like a broken record, but waiting to plan for long-term care and dealing with these situations in a crisis and dealing with them without a plan, it just causes the experience to be more stressful. It causes it to, um, take a toll on you. And when we get in these situations, we just really have to prioritize and be mindful of self-care, keeping up with our own physical and mental health. It has to be a priority. You cannot pour from an empty cup, so making sure that those things don't fall to the wayside, that you're still taking care of your own health, that you're taking time, to do things that you enjoy, that you're keeping up with your own medical and mental health appointments, and processing your feelings. I mean, we talked about the guilt, that comes with it. I talk in the book about, all the different array of feelings. It can be like a roller coaster of feelings that you experience in this caregiving journey, but you have to take the time to process those and talk them through with a mental health professional, because otherwise they just become very overwhelming very quickly. And so, seek counseling, seek support, find a support group, prioritizing the social support. We talked about that for your loved one, but prioritize it for yourself as well. Talking with other people who are going through the same thing. It's amazing how many people as caregivers think that they are the only one, that nobody else gets it. I'm the only one that's going through this. But again, we talked about the prevalence of this caregiving role. You're not alone. There's a whole community out there. So, seeking out others who are going through the same thing, who have walked it before you, and getting advice and just, that emotional support is something I can't emphasize enough how important that is.
Yeah. What tips do you have, Pam, for people who are planning ahead for this?
I think, my overall most important tip is putting together that team, is identifying the resources. When you are planning for aging, it's like planning for anything else in life. You don't know what you don't know. And trying to do everything on your own and identify the resources and the support that you need, when you're just starting from scratch. You can't just Google and figure out what you need and how to get it. So finding the right people, finding the resources that can point you in the right direction, putting an advocacy team in place ahead of the crisis so that you have the right people to call on. And when I say advocacy team, I go to those key areas, the medical, the financial, the legal. Find the people who do know what you don't know and can be there for you to walk through the different crises that you may have. And then again, having realistic expectations and boundaries. The self-assessment in the book walks you through that. Understanding kind of what your limits are and where you're going to need the help, and then having the resources in place, for that help before the time hits. I think those are my biggest areas that I would urge people to work on.
Very good. We have quite a few questions.
Okay.
First question, Pam. Somebody asked, do reference materials exist to guide someone in the creation of a plan?
Yes, there are resources out there. And again, when I talk about kind of putting a plan in place, I mean, there's resources out there that are kind of scattered all over. So, it can be difficult to figure out where to start or what to use. There's a lot of national resources in my website. I have a list, a resource list there. That's not specific to geography. So I think we're going to
Mhm.
provide the website later. You can go there. The Caregiver Alliance, I think it's Caregiver Alliance .org, I think. I don't know, again, it's on my website. That's a really good place to start. They have a lot of amazing tools that you can use to get started and get things organized. And then again, pulling together that advocacy team. Each of those professionals, they're going to have resources for you. They're going to guide you and walk you through the tools that they use and the options that they have. So I would say drilling that down, getting that team together, and then following their guidance is probably the best way to start.
Yeah, you mentioned boots on the ground. Somebody said this care team, is it possible that some of this care team can, does it have to be just local, or can they be somebody who's an outside of the area that provides that virtual or that telephone assistance or guidance?
Sure. As I mentioned, the technology has made things so much easier in terms of providing that social support network. And so I think finding the right professional is really what matters. So if they're not local and they can provide virtual options and that works for you and your family, great. Sometimes I find that family caregivers don't live near their aging loved one and they know someone in their own community or their own network that's able to help them. Wonderful. They don't have to necessarily be in the area where your loved one is. My only caveat to that would be if there's local laws, local resources that they aren't aware of, that would be a downside. So just finding the right professional who has the knowledge that you need is most important, and then bringing them in, bringing them together however you can. And sometimes, our loved ones will have professionals in place that we just need to bring in closer, right? So they might already have a financial advisor they've been working with for, decades. But they don't know. They don't know what's going on. They don't know the dementia is coming. They don't know that there's been an illness or an injury. They don't know that long-term care is right on the horizon. So reach out to the support network that your loved one already has and just try to bring them in closer and evaluate whether they really are the right person, to be a part of this team now that things are, some professionals are great when things are going smoothly, but then when crisis hits, they may not be the right person for the job. So bringing that network in closer, evaluating, making sure you've got the right team in place, regardless of their location, is the best way to start.
What do you say to individuals that have multiple kids, if you will? So you have a loved one, just say there's your mother who's dealing with dementia, and there's multiple children. How
Mhm.
does that dynamic, how do you recommend that they have those conversations amongst the family kids, and who handles what? How do those conversations look? I know that conversation could, those conversations could last forever, but how does it get started?
Yeah, those conversations are so difficult because there's every family is different and there's different dynamics, there's different history, there's different relationships, there's different personalities, and so there's no one absolute answer to that. But I think one of the best ways, and especially when you are the primary caregiver, you are the one, maybe you're the closest that lives nearby, or you're the one that your aging loved one has chosen to be in this agent role. When you are in that position, it's very important to keep the other siblings involved, to keep the other, family members informed, to have good communication with them, to let them know what's happening, what steps you're taking. Because even if you are that primary decision maker or you're that primary caregiver, keeping them informed does, and keeping them like abreast on every decision that you make and what's happening, it does two things. Number one is it makes them realize, it helps them see what is going on, how much you're doing, and that you need support. And so they're much more likely to offer support and to, help you even when you don't know how to ask for help. And the second thing that it does is it kind of covers you, right? So even if you have a family member, a sibling who's not very involved or doesn't want to help, keeping them involved and communicating with them regardless, it's almost like, covering your tracks, right? Making sure, hey, I told you about this, you had the option, and just making sure that when later on, when conflicts inevitably end up arising, that you've kept everyone involved, and they can't say, you didn't tell us this, or we didn't see this coming. So I think, whether it's and different families do it different ways, whether it's having teleconference or it's having a joint email or a group chat or something like that, but just good documentation of that communication is key.
Last question, Pam. You've been in the field for a long time, like you said, your whole career. Did you learn anything that you maybe, not that you didn't know, but is something that kind of came to the forefront in writing this book that was like, oh my goodness, people really need to know this, that may be something that kind of is in the background a little bit?
Oh gosh, that's a good one. I think, honestly, I think for me, the biggest thing that really became more alive for me, or became more obvious to me in writing the book, was how important the emotional aspect is. How important it is to think about, the toll and the burden that a caregiver is under, and really prioritizing the relationships, between the caregiver and the care recipient, because it can become very easy to just get in task driver mode and to just get in this role where everything is a to-do list, and we lose something, we lose a relationship. It's very important to remember you are still their son, their daughter, their niece, their nephew, whatever that is. And it's not that I didn't know that. I think it's just in writing the book, it became, as I kind of remembered a lot of the situations I'd seen, a lot of the conversations I've had, and caregivers I've spoken with, and then even my own experience, it's very easy for us to overlook that. And then after the fact, when your loved one is gone, that's what you're mourning. That's what you're grieving, is you're grieving the loss of their life, but then the fact that the last, several years was spent just with the to-do list, and you didn't really have that connection. And so I think that to me, that really stood out as just emphasizing the importance of keeping those relationships alive, the importance of bringing in the resources and the team to take some of those tasks off of you so that you can focus on that relationship, so that you don't have regrets later of what you lost in those final years.
Wonderful. Great stuff, Pam. So, how can people find you?
So, my website, the website that's up on the screen now, caregivingwithconfidence.com, that is for the book. It's also going to be, it's in the process now of, I'm going to be having an online course that people can take. So that's going to be built out this year. And then my email is the Aging Authority. I also have a website, theagingauthority.com. That is where you can find the resource list I spoke about earlier. Also my blog, and then there's a link to the book as well. So if you want to reach out to me directly, if you have a question we didn't get answered today, or you're looking for more resources, feel free to email me. It's the Aging Authority, TheAgingAuthority @gmail.com. That's the best way to reach me right now.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Pam. As far as Knowledgeable Aging, you go to our website, knowledgeableaging.com, see all of our upcoming and archive webinars. Go to YouTube, type in Knowledgeable Aging. We encourage you to subscribe. If podcasts are your thing, you can find us on Apple, Tunes, Spotify, etc. Until next time, I'm your host, Jason Kotar. This is Knowledgeable Aging.